Okay, there are two parts to today's notes. And this first part is just kind of going over, again, we talked about this a little bit a couple days ago, but being able to interpret the different numbers in a linear story problem. So that means in this case, the slope and the intercepts. So to do this, I'm going to start by talking about a simple word problem. Say I have a word problem that talks about the height of, a basic candle. So if we have a candle that starts off 5 inches tall, for example, and it burns 1 inch every 3 hours, okay? So that would be, I'd call it height. The height of the candle starts off, I think I said 5 inches tall, and then it burns, so we're going to subtract from that 1 inch every 3 hours. Okay, so there's a linear story problem. So I talked about this a little bit already, but when it comes to interpreting the slope, you've got to identify what the different pieces of the story problem are. So in this case, change in y over change in x is change in the output is height. So you're going to have to look at the story problem, figure out what is the output, over a change in x, which is a change in this case, time. Okay, so then you're going to have to write up a sentence describing the slope. So this right here, this is just an example. You'd say it doesn't matter which one you start with, whether you start with the x variable or the y variable, but you have to make sure you include units. Okay, so you would say for every 3 hours, and then I don't think this really fits with it. I'd say the candle burns, let's see, the candle is 1 inch shorter. Okay, and there are so many different ways you could say that exact same thing. The candle, you could say it backwards. The candle is 1 inch shorter every 3 hours because it loses an inch of its height for every 3 hours it's burning. So there are so many different ways you could word it. As long as that comes across, the units are there, you'll get the point for interpreting the slope. Now, the other thing I want you to be able to do is interpret the intercepts for this problem. Now, if I were to just sketch a very basic look of this. Okay, so it starts off at 5 and then it's got a negative slope. Okay, so it's burning, it's going to burn out, right? Now, obviously this line is up here and also over here, but the only part that's actually applicable is in quadrant 1. Okay, so the y-intercept in this case is the original height of the candle. The initial height of the candle when it hasn't been burned. So when time is 0, if you haven't burned the candle at all, it's 5 inches tall. Now, what does it mean here? Okay, so that means it's burnt for a couple hours, right? Well, it's the amount of time it takes for the height to be 0. Okay, height of the candle is 5 inches. Here at the x-axis, the height is 0. So the x-intercept means that's the amount of time. I don't know why it gets down here and amount of time it takes for candle to burn out. And its height is 0. So, this example is for a candle. I can write, so many different examples. So let's try one more together. Okay, Kim is a math tutor, and she rents a room for her tutoring business for $400 a month. Okay, so she doesn't want to tutor at her house, so she found some place that rents to her for $400 a month. So she goes to this, like, I don't know, some sort of rental space, and she pays $400 a month for her rental space, like a Sylvan or something. Okay, so she charges $40 per hour that she tutors. I want you to pause my video, and I want you to try to write an equation that represents how much she makes in a month, keeping in mind she's got to pay the $400 for the use of the rental room that she's renting, and then she makes $40 an hour. Okay, so, if I have Y is going to represent the amount of money she makes in a month. So maybe you used M for money or P for profit, the amount she takes home. Okay, but she makes $40, and if X is the amount of hours, so she makes 40 times X, but then considering you then have to subtract from that the $400 she has to pay in rent. Okay, so it says to write the equation. There's the equation. Then we're going to interpret the slope and the intercepts. Okay, well, remember how I said when it comes to interpreting the slope, the first thing I want you to do is write out what is slope. Slope is a change in y over a change in x. So I want you to do this every time and identify what the different pieces are. Well, the change in y is a change in the amount she makes, a change in the money, okay, over a change in time. Okay, so our slope in this case is 40 over 1. So it's 40, that's dollars, over change in hours, the time. So that means $40 per hour. Notice that one was basically mentioned in the word problem. That's not uncommon. So interpret the slope. Now again, this is where you have different options on how you're going to word this. You can say she makes $40 every 1 hour, or every 1 hour she tutors, she makes $40. Notice I just basically said the exact same thing. I would accept both. Kim makes $40 every 1 hour she tutors. Okay, so then let's do the y-intercept. The y-intercept is in the problem. It is negative 400. Okay, what does that mean in this word problem? Well, remember the $400 was the rent charge. Okay, so if X is 0 and X is hours, if she tutors 0 hours, she loses $400, right? She's going to be $400 in the hole. So that's what the y-intercept is. If Kim doesn't tutor, she still has to pay rent. She's in the hole. She loses, let's see, $400. Okay, that's the y-intercept. Now, the x-intercept we need to interpret, but guess what? We don't currently know that, okay? So the x-intercept is when The x-intercept is when y is equal to 0. So that would mean we have 0 equals 40x minus 400. So if we solve for that, we'd add 400 over, divide by 40. X is equal to 10 hours. Okay, so then I want you to pause the video and think about what that means. Okay, so if she works 10 hours, that means she makes $400 tutoring, but then you subtract the $400 from the rent that she has to pay. Okay, so she has to work 10 hours just to break even, is what this means. She would make $0. If she works 10 hours, you could say a few things. If she works 10 hours, she breaks even because of the rent. Or if she works 10 hours, she makes $0. So she has to work more than 10 hours to even make a profit in a month. Okay, so your additional homework is a worksheet actually for this, and that is posted to PowerSchool Learning.